Hello, this is Sheila Bender, and you are listening to In Conversation, discussions on writing and the writing life. Today we have with us Bill Thorness, a Seattle writer. He's freelance and he's an editor. He's the author of 5 books. In addition to the guidebook we're going to be talking about, Cycling the Pacific Coast, the complete guide from Canada to Mexico. He has written many other books. Biking Puget Sound, 60 Rides from Olympia to the San Juans is in its 2nd edition, and there are 2 books on edible gardening and a profile of an auto industry executive. His articles have appeared in many regional publications, including the Seattle Times, Cascade, Courier, Edible Seattle, and the PCC Sound Consumer, as well as numerous places online. Welcome to the program, Bill.
Thank you, Sheila. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. My bicycling on the Pacific Coast has been mostly not on the coast, mostly Seattle, parts of the Olympic Peninsula, and it's an exciting book to read. It could be an armchair bicyclist reading it. When I opened the book and began, I always somehow begin at the beginning of books, I was so enthralled with your opening that I was hoping you might read to us to begin our conversation.
Sure. All right. So I'll just read the little bit of the first introduction.
Thank you.
It had been a long day riding solo on a predictable road, and I was living inside my head, singing favorite songs and composing haiku. When I arrived at the shared hiker-biker campsite, 3 small cycling groups were tending to their tents and sourcing their suppers from the depths of their panniers. I said hi and set about making camp, but the day was not complete. Something was missing. So I walked out of the campground entrance, plunked down $5, and hefted a bundle of firewood. It is an anthropological experiment to make a fire in a communal campground. People gather. Stories are told, advice is given and taken. Plans are shared. Food and drink gets passed. Conversation goes round like the wood smoke shifting in the wind. Sharing experiences is the spark that ignites the mind, which is what directs the body. Meeting others, whether they are on your path or just intersecting, stokes your resolve and renews energy. However important the achievement of tackling a long-distance bicycle trip seems, it is the human interaction that stays with you, that has the power. You pass through many places. There's a familiarity that blends them together, but people are unique, interesting, inspiring. When you cycle the Pacific Coast and you want to go deeper, build a fire. An epic ride. Do you want to hear
Yes, of course.
why I call it epic?
Yes.
The Pacific Coast is epic. I've heard that phrase again and again from friends who look admiringly at my achievement of riding it, and from fellow travelers trying to explain the trip. I found it true in so many ways. Epic is a ribbon of highway clinging to bluffs high above a craggy shore. Epic is mile after mile of glittering coastline, silver waters sparkling like sequins on the dress of a shimmying dancer. Epic is hulking sea stacks, dark rock looming over the crashing waves. Epic is towering trees whose shadowy canopy shields the road from a steady rain. Epic is a redwood forest absorbing all sound. Epic is a roadside cafe serving simple, warming food or refreshingly cold drinks. Epic is hours of steadily climbing among winding switchbacks. Epic is wind whistling through your helmet as you whiz down the other side. Epic is fording a mighty river on a steep, too narrow bridge. Epic is spotting the city skyline, then putting it in the mirror. Epic is a hill-hugging, cliff-drop road. Epic is a dune, a boardwalk, a pier, a trail, fish tacos, and iced tea. Epic is pairing up for a ride with a new cycling friend met on the route. Epic is washing off the road salt in a pounding surf. Epic is self-supported, pedal-powered travel. Epic is Canada to Mexico on America's Pacific Coast.
Well, I have chills, and I also feel like I've been on that epic ride with you.
The rest of it is all about directions.
Well, can I say that your book seems to me quite epic? I mean, it's a lot of research, a lot of detail, a lot of really helpful information so that someone who wants to do this ride or part of this ride will open your book and they'll feel like they're in really good hands. And I think personally doing that kind of project is an epic project.
Yeah, well, it was for me, yes.
How did you come up with the idea that you would take the responsibility of writing a book like this?
There had been a previous book on this topic called Bicycling the Pacific Coast, also published by the Mountaineers Books here in Seattle, and it has been around for many years, and it's really been a valuable tool. I think it went through 4 editions over time. The folks who wrote that were not interested in updating it yet again, and it had been long enough out of date that it really needed something. So they asked me if I would be interested in writing a completely new guide. Obviously, I'm not going to update someone else's work or wouldn't want to. So I thought about it and said, if you give me enough time, I'll do it, because it was a big project.
Right. And did you have to do extra bicycling?
I tell people now it's like 2 years of the best working vacations you'd ever have.
How did you even begin to organize your work schedule and play schedule to do a book like this?
Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm a freelance worker, so a lot of my schedule is my own. I was able to fit in trips, short trips, a lot of them through the Northwest, and then longer trips into California 2 or 3 times. Or I think I did 4 trips to California, including one trip where I just biked the entire length of California. It took me most of the month of October to do that. My wife dropped me off at the California border on October 5th. I met her in San Diego on October 29th with 1 day off in San Francisco to see some friends. Otherwise, that was biking. So that was a wonderful trip, but I couldn't do the entire trip from Canada to Mexico all at once. That's 2 months' worth of riding, and I could figure out a week here or there to go and explore one section or another.
Were you taking notes the whole time?
Researching a book like this is much more than just, as you can probably imagine, I'm sure you know, much more than just riding the route. Mm-hmm. There's lots of photography. There's a photograph for each day's ride in the book, which of course takes many, many more photographs than are in the book, hundreds and hundreds. There were a lot of route decisions along the way. Do I want to go this way or that way? Or getting a little lost and then saying, oh, that sign has changed since the maps were put out, and now I have to go this direction. Or deciding, do I want to end the day at this campground or that campground? And tons of advanced research before going out on a section, and then on the bike, research and re-riding and decision-making. And people don't like to ride with me because I stop and talk to everyone I meet. I might turn around and go back and say, I think I need to redo this. So I rode a lot of it on my own.
I can imagine. And in this guide, you tell us the biking miles, the elevations, talk about safety and the gear needed, and it's very complete.
Some of the high points of what you'll see along the way, or interesting things about the history of the area, or about the locals, or what they're doing, or snarky little comments about a town that names every one of its neighborhood, the historic this neighborhood, the historic that neighborhood.
Well, that's why it's such good reading, even if a person doesn't plan to do the whole route. It at least makes you excited about maybe even bicycling around your own town and doing it the Bill Thorness way.
Or just driving the Oregon coast. There's a lot to see. Best seen on a bike, I would argue, but any mode of transportation.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's absolutely right. So it's a guide for anyone traveling the route. I'd like to go back to your beautiful opening that you read to us. It intrigued me from the get-go that you could be bicycling and writing haiku in your head. And I would love to know a little bit more about how that happens to you and when you stop and write it down and how that all works. I mean, haiku takes the effort to really look at what you're seeing, what you're experiencing as you're going by, but it also takes the concentration to make things compressed in the words that you use. So how did you come to haiku, and how does that work when you're enjoying creating it in your head?
Well, that's a good question. I really like the form just to try to make the cadence work. And bicycling is all about cadence. Mm-hmm. When you think about it, you're pedaling, you're moving constantly in a rhythmic way. So maybe that's how the two of them came together. It's also short enough that you can hold a thought in your mind while you're playing around with the language. And it's short enough that hopefully you can remember them long enough to write them down. Although you asked a minute ago, how did I take notes while I research this. I've long used a mini tape recorder, the digital versions now. I think I drove over one of my mini tape recorders while I was bicycling for the book, because I would bike along, and so I have all these panniers on my bike, including one on the handlebars. So it's a little bag on the front on the handlebars that contains my camera. I carry a big SLR camera, a couple of snacks, my money and my phone and my maps. And then it's got a couple little pockets on the side, and on one of those pockets I put in a very slim little recorder that about the size of two fingers set side by side. And you pull that out. I got to learn very fast which was the record button on the thing. So without even looking at it, I could pull it out and punch record and then talk into it as I'm biking. So I could look down at my computer and say, at 43.5 miles, I'm crossing this river, and there's an incredible view below of something or whatever.
And you could speak some of your haiku into the recorder.
I could dictate, basically, to myself anything I thought of that I wanted to maybe use for the book. So then I would go home and do a very tedious transcription of all of the recorded notes that I made on that particular trip.
So much work. Did you say you ran over a recorder?
Yeah, I had pulled one out, and actually it was an earlier version. It was slightly bigger, but I really liked it. It had just big buttons that were very easy to use. I was fumbling with it when I was recording something, and I was riding with a friend of mine. He was a little bit ahead of me. I think we were climbing a hill at the time, and I was really working, but I wanted to make this note, and I was trying to put it back in my pannier, and it slipped and went and hit the ground. And then I looked down at it, and just as I rolled over it, I realized my back tire is just going to crush this thing. And I rolled over it, and he heard it up ahead, and he said, "That did not sound good."
So how much information did you lose? Well,
that's the funny thing. It destroyed the screen, but I could still plug it in and download the
that must have been...
But I couldn't use it again.
That must have been a big relief, though, not to lose all that.
Yeah, it was. But you really have to keep up on downloading those things and not let them accumulate.
Right.
And then you also have to sort of really keep up on transcribing, because that can get to be such a large project that it's just like a weight over your head.
Your readers and the mountaineers who publish this book are really lucky that you put all that effort and time into the project. It's phenomenal to me. It's epic.
You are listening to KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend. In case you just joined us, you are listening to In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life. Today, Sheila is talking with Seattle author Bill Thorness about writing and research for his book, Cycling the Pacific Coast, the complete guide from Canada to Mexico.
So what do you do in between projects like this? Or maybe now on your next project? What kind of writing are you involved in?
The book came out in November, and I did some pre-holiday book touring just around the Puget Sound area, did a bunch of presentations, but right now I'm doing a lot of that, giving presentations at libraries and bookstores, and there's a special bond between cyclists and beer. So I'm doing a lot of presentations in connection with microbreweries.
Of which we have a few in Port Townsend.
Really fun. Yeah, they're all over. So you can always get me out to do a presentation if it's a microbrewery.
Okay.
That takes a fair amount of time of planning them, working with the publicist for Mountaineers, and then getting out there. But I have been teaching editing for a number of years with UW, which I'm ending this year, but that's been a very good project for me. I do some writing for the Seattle Times. I've got a few stories coming up for them that I'm planning into my schedule. I give talks on my gardening book topics as well as cycling, which are on growing food in our region. That's the topic of both of my gardening books, so I'll be at the garden shows and the Master Gardeners events and things like that.
So has gardening been something that, as bicycling, has been something that you just love doing, and therefore the writing comes from that?
Somehow I talked somebody into letting me write and publish about the things that I really like doing. And there is some commonality in them. It's interesting because both pastimes sort of let your mind wander a little bit. You asked me about the haiku, and when you're cycling down a road for a couple hours at a time, and you might stop, but if you want to get anywhere, you really need to be on your bike for 7 or 8 hours a day. And when you're going down the road like that, there isn't that much input constantly, so you can really let your mind wander and think how I'm going to write this section of the book or what I'm going to write about from this ride that I'm doing now, or listening to the sounds of the area around me and sort of composing a little bit of haiku. And you can do that while you're gardening as well. Some people say they get their best ideas in the shower. I mean, I get my best ideas on my bike.
Mm-hmm.
And I still do that today. I'll go out for a bike ride when I am in the middle of a work day, just to maybe reset my brain so that I can come back and really tackle that article that I've been working on, or a new approach to the research.
Right.
That I need to do.
Reminding me of something I read years ago in a book by Rollo May, a psychologist. It was a book on creativity, and what he said happens to us is that we'll work really hard, like writing, and then when we switch to play of some kind, that's when we get the aha moment. And I've always remembered that you do have to get up from your desk, and you do have to move your body, and anything rhythmical. I had a lot of poetry teachers who played basketball, because the rhythmical things, or even the water of a shower, anything like that really does change the way our minds are working and get us unstuck or into new territory. The more I listen to you talk about gardening and about biking and about combining your writing with what interests you, is your background as a native Seattleite? Did you grow up here?
No, I grew up in North Dakota. I started out life on a farm and studied in North Dakota at the University of North Dakota, and moved to Seattle after college, after a couple of years of goofing around, after college to find a job. There aren't a lot of writing jobs in North Dakota. There weren't, of course. Today you can do that anywhere with the advent of the internet, but in the 80s, early 80s, when I moved here, I had some family out here. My grandparents lived on the peninsula in Port Townsend, in Port Angeles, I'm sorry. Still have a cousin over there, and so I always liked visiting that area. So it was kind of natural. I came out here to sort of scout out the landscape and moved in 85.
So farming was in your background, and
yes.
Was bicycling in your background as well before you came to
Seattle? Not really.
Seattle?
I mean, I had a bike as a kid. I had a really sweet little banana bike I rode around as a kid, but I didn't bring a bike with me to Seattle. I traveled very light. I didn't even bring my entire collection of vinyl records, picked the best ones, and gave the rest away. I regret that now.
My husband does too.
Yeah. I came out here without much. I decided to start fresh and really enjoyed hiking for a long time, skiing, and got into cycling to commute to a job in downtown Seattle. I cycled for a lot of years commuting and started doing the long rides with Cascade Bicycle Club, and I'm a ride leader with Cascade, teaching people how to conquer the STP and ride 100 miles a day.
Wow. So it sounds like Seattle was a great fit for you. I mean, you got here and then widened out into the bicycling and hiking and all of that. And you're leaving quite a legacy here, because I was looking at the list of your books and reading about them, and I realized next up on my list is your edible heirlooms and seed saving information that, as a gardener, I'm really interested in learning more about. And want to tell us anything about those books?
Well, Edible Heirlooms was my first book with Mountaineers Skipstone imprint, and that's about growing heirloom vegetables and the value of keeping the old varieties alive. I had fallen in with the gang at Seattle Tilth and learned a lot from them, and we were very actively urban farming early in that trend. And I realized in the 90s that I had been growing heirlooms and not really thinking about it. We had a close association with the Abundant Life Seed Foundation in Port Townsend. They promoted and sold and traded and shared that type of seed, by and large, open-pollinated heirloom old varieties. I wanted to tell their stories. every seed has a story, how it got to the U.S., where it came from, what's unique about it. That book helped me do that. And then I followed it up with Cool Season Gardener, which is a synthesis of my learning also through Seattle Tilt and all the other organizations around here and practice over 20 years of how to grow food year-round in our climate. And in both of those books, I talk about the vegetables varieties that grow well here and the crops that people are commonly growing here.
Are you still doing that? Are you still gardening?
Oh, yes. I've got a really wonderful cauliflower sitting out in my yard waiting to be picked and enjoyed, kale and chard, and I've started my first crop of salad greens for this year under lights in my garage.
So you're an all-season gardener.
Yeah. I like growing year-round. And I don't grow as much for the summer season anymore just because I'm so busy in the summer. I want to do other things besides hang out in my garden or work in my garden. So the cool season crops where you're putting them in summer and fall, but you're really reaping the benefits in the winter. They work great for a busy
That's a good tip.
A busy person
That's
in the summer.
But you must enjoy being out there in the rain in the winter.
Well, you just look for you look for that one little blue spot in the sky, and you go, okay, time to go out. Again, a benefit of being a sort of a freelance worker with a carpet commute at home.
You can get out there when the sun is out, or at least the clouds are higher.
Yeah, when the rain has stopped.
So before we have to end, I'd love to ask you if you have any advice for people who would like to start writing books from what they know, from what they'd like to share with other people.
From these guidebooks, I've kind of applied my journalism background because I have been a journalist for many years and started in that of the research needs to be done in manageable chunks and applying that to a book-length manuscript. Journalism is all about short, bring it into your brain and get it out quickly and move on to the next thing. But when you get to a book-length manuscript, applying that idea of the research and the planning in manageable chunks. So you're not writing a book, you're writing a series of pieces that will become a book.
People can think of segments rather than a whole book.
Yeah, manageable amounts of information and tackling. Today I'm just going to write this. I'm going to do 500 words on this topic that is right at the top of my mind, and maybe tomorrow I'll move on to something else.
So do you think it's a good idea for people, as you have, to obviously connect with organizations that publish? So you've got the Mountaineers, and they have a publishing wing. You wrote for, I think it was Edible Seattle?
Yep.
So
and Edible Portland, and Edible this and Edible that. Yeah.
So it's almost like connecting with what you're interested in anyway in terms of gathering information and seeing if what you have to say might add to those pages.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to really connect up with publishers, but as far as nonfiction books anyway, knowing the marketplace and the competing titles in the topic you're interested in and being able to really understand where you would fit into that is a really great thing when you do have a chance to get in front of an editor or talk to an agent or a publisher and say, here's where I would fit in. There is no niche here for this in our market or nothing in that niche. So yeah, I mean, really being involved on many levels is helpful.
Right. And it sounds like you're a very active person, and I know you have a next project because you're stopping teaching the editing. And did you want to just say where you're headed?
Be happy to. It's very different, but I have been on and off researching this for a long time. My father was a soldier in World War II in the Anzio campaign in Italy, and he was in the first team that became the Green Berets, the first Special Service Force, commando expeditionary forces. His story and the history of that group and that campaign is something that has long interested me. I want to sort of explore his world, and really I'm thinking about the next generations in my family knowing about this. hopefully it will be of wider interest, but I really feel I need to follow through on his history.
Is your dad
that story?
Is your dad still alive?
Oh no, he died many years ago.
And do you have letters and documents that you'll also be working with?
Some, but not so much. That's a problem, and the research has been difficult and continues to be difficult. The soldiers in World War II, I think they experienced such horror of it all that they never talked about it.
They didn't talk about it, yeah.
He was a farmer, not a writer.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's going to be a wonderful opening for your book, I think. He was a farmer, not a writer. But you are a writer, and I'm sure that you'll end up doing a fabulous job. And I feel so inspired on many levels after talking with you. I want to get out there. I want to plant some seeds. I want to think about winter gardening. I want to get on my bicycle again or drive down the coast a little ways. I look forward to reading more of your work, keeping in touch. So thank you so much for the
thank you. And the bike ride down the coast goes right through Port Townsend.
I'll be reading that chapter in particular.
I love visiting there.
Yeah. Well, I hope you come here to our town and give one of your presentations. I'll be sending you some information on our breweries.
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thanks, Sheila. Take care.
In Conversation is produced by Sheila Bender and edited by Charlie Fleischman.